Thanks for joining, and huge thank you, Stevon. Thanks for being here today and taking time out of your Thursday/Friday, since you do the 4-day work week, which we love. But thanks so much for being here. I'd love to just start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got to where you are today.
So I'm Stevon Lewis. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for you guys having me to kind of speak to Power Digital. This is fun. I like to talk about what I do and talk about myself. There's the narcissist coming out, right? But no, I'm Stevon Lewis. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I am based out of Los Angeles, Inglewood area to be exact. I'm a local kid, never left. I got started in therapy probably, what was that, like 2007 is when I started doing therapy, and started off kind of working in community mental health with the families of kids involved in the juvenile justice system. Kind of worked my way up in an organization called Shields for Families, became like a program manager and supervised some other therapists. Left there in 2014 and went to a small private college that no one on this call has ever heard of, called Woodbury University in Burbank. It's a brick and mortar school. It does exist. And the reason nobody's heard of it is because all the majors are really kind of slated towards the industry or studio culture stuff. So like architecture, film, animation, all that stuff. And I was the director of counseling services there for like 5 years. And then in 2019, I kind of jumped into private practice full time. And I've never looked back since then.
Well, it looks like we have some people in the chat whose moms went to that same school.
No way. Well, they do have a campus down like in a satellite campus, but people went to Woodbury. That is awesome. It's been around for like over 100 years. It's amazing that people I would never think. That is fantastic.
Small world. I'd love to dig into more about like how your upbringing got you to where you are today, and then also learn more about how you decided professionally to go into this career path, since it's a super interesting path.
Sure. So both of those questions are kind of tied to one another. I've known I wanted to be a therapist for a very long time. I tell people that I've always kind of been curious about other people's behavior and kind of what's going on with them. So I'm fascinated by people's stories. So as a person, I am, the things I'm interested in, I like documentaries because it tells a story about something. Docuseries, like I like to find out the behind the scenes stuff. That's always been me. And so kind of when you think about or asking about, like my upbringing, how I got here. So again, local kid, parents came from the South, met out here in California. Mom's from Birmingham, Alabama, dad, Meridian, Mississippi. And, both of them like blue collar workers. First in my family, I'm the youngest of 3. I have 2 older sisters, but I'm the first to finish college. My sisters have gone back and since kind of gotten their degree, but that wasn't a thing in our house. So I understand kind of getting out there and figuring stuff out along the way. That's kind of just been my truth, and I've been gifted or endowed with a good amount of intelligence, and so that's kind of really helped me along the way. And I think the pivotal part for me was, I don't know how familiar people are with like California school system or whatnot, especially LAUSD, but they have this thing called the Choices program. And what it does is it allows people from like, one area of the city to go to schools that aren't like in their neighborhood. And so my mom, in all her wisdom, when I was like in 3rd grade, said that I should go to this school out in the Hollywood Hills, which is very far from the inner city where I lived. And so it's like this culture shock thing. And when I got there, I was like a handful of Black kids there. And in that moment, like, my experiences there early on, this is like 3rd grade, I recognized that the rules were going to be different for Stevon Lewis. And so I, unknowingly, but kudos to me, I kind of made a decision of like, well, if the rules are going to be different, then I can either try to, be all the things that people will want, or I can just be me and like let the chips fall where they may. And I chose the latter. And so when we kind of full circle bring it back to like, my work with like imposter syndrome and stuff like that, it's always been fascinating to me of like why people don't choose themselves or like lean into who they are more than like, doubting what they know to be true for them.
How did you find yourself doing the podcast, writing a book, having your private practice? Like, what inspired each of those parts of your professional career?
Oh, wow. So for me, I don't know if, everybody obviously didn't go to like school to be a therapist. When you're in school to become a therapist, you're kind of given this narrative or this message that you're going to go out into the world and do a bunch of things. You'll get into private practice and you'll write books and you'll do this stuff. No one ever teaches you how to do that, but they just say it'll happen. And so you'll see people start to do those things, and it's like, well, I have no roadmap for that. But me kind of finding imposter syndrome was, I had a bunch of clients. So I'll give a discount. I love all my clients. All my clients are fantastic. The ones that I kind of, I guess, felt like more aligned to, all kind of presented with this same thing. And like how I talked about really, really being fascinated by people's stories, is that I'm working with individuals who are really high achievers. Like, they're doing amazing things. Somebody is contracts with like PayPal and, LinkedIn, and another person might kind of have 2 movies in the movie theater at a given time. But for whatever reason, they aren't able to connect to that part of themselves that's responsible for their success. And so like you start to kind of peel back the layers and hear their history, and they have these similarities there. And that stuff fascinated me. And so I started like digging into it and found out, this is like back in 2016, 2017, that there was this whole, field of study like around this stuff. And so like, I think we've heard it more recently about imposter syndrome. It's become super mainstream. But yeah, when I got back started, I was like, oh, I never heard of this. And then it became a thing. And so those clients, I was like, these are the clients that I get really excited for, because you're doing all this amazing stuff. And like, it's my mission now to make sure that you are able to connect to the parts of you that are successful or responsible for your success. And so like, started doing that, and that was private practice. And I just started talking about it more places. I was the president for a while for the Long Beach South Bay chapter of California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. I talk about it there at every meeting and presenting on it. And a lot of the stuff that I find is, I'll say I find it, right? So it's opportunities are afforded to me, and I just don't say no. So like when you talk about podcasts, it's like, oh, well, how did you get this production company to produce your podcast? Well, I said I would never do a podcast until, somebody like paid me to do it, because it's a lot of work. And I just ended up being on a bunch of other people's podcasts. And the executive director of the production company, I was on a podcast she was on, and she was like, I have an offer for you. We're going to do something. And so I just like, my career has been a result of me saying yes. So I have this philosophy of like, say yes, and if you don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again. And that's really led to me kind of getting into some really cool situations.
That's a great philosophy. I love that. I feel like a lot of people one of our core values is just having a growth mindset. And so sounds like that's just growth mindset to a T, challenging yourself and pushing yourself to try something new, because you might love it. You might hate it. But if you hate it, you don't have to do it again. So
and that's our tendency, right? Like we tend to focus on, I think our brains are just wired like that. I mean, I won't dive into like the whole evolutionary psychology thing, but it's protective in nature. Like we should recognize unpleasantness and bad things because they can bring us harm. I don't know that that's so helpful when we're like trying to be better and do different things. So like we've got to kind of push past that to take on some stuff that might be uncomfortable, but can have really good outcomes.
Well, when you talk about the being surrounded by high achievers, did that ever mentally get to you? Like, did you ever experience this comparison, just being surrounded by this level of high achievers in the therapy community and then also with your patients?
Mm-hmm. So you're going to find out now that like I'm a language hawk. So you said like comparison, and I get on my clients about this because comparison just says two things are similar or they're different. We got to add the word in there negatively, right? Because what the problem is when we start to negatively compare ourselves to people. So I really am kind of an interesting person, I think, in the sense that most of the people I work with are doing amazing things, and they do go around like negatively comparing themselves. Like there's this perfectionism that lies kind of is like rooted in who they are. And so they're kind of, I guess, downgrading what they're putting out into the world based on what other people are doing. For me, that energizes me. When I'm in rooms with people who are doing stuff, I get excited about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And agreed, comparison is only negative if you make it negative. But I think as young professionals, and we've got a young team, myself included, I think that's kind of the mentality that can creep in of not looking at what you're focusing on, but maybe looking at the others around you. And so when you're working with your clients or patients on that, what are some things that you encourage them to do to really focus on, bettering themselves and winning what they're trying to accomplish?
So as a as a therapist or coach, like I'm a very literal and logical person. That's just Stephen Lewis in general. And so like when I'm working with someone, I can do emotions to a degree, but I'm very direct. And so I ask questions that don't make sense to me. So if you're senior director of all things Power Digital, if you're saying a lot of
we lost you for a second. You froze for maybe.
Am I still here?
5. You're back.
All right. What did we miss? All of it.
You said you are senior, and then it broke out for me.
Oh, I was saying you're like senior director, vice president of like all things Power Digital. That's what I said. And I was like,
so like my new title, senior director.
Yeah, of all of the things. And if you're like doing that, you have this title, someone's hired you to do this, and you're kind of doubting, like, well, I've not had this position before, and now I'm over a team that's this many people, and I don't know. So in my mind, that doesn't make sense. It's like, well, what you're telling me is that all the people who hired you, you interviewed, you applied for this job, and however you got it, or how they found you and they offered it to you, however you got in this position, you're saying every woman is wrong but you. And like I ask questions in that way of like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you really like not supposed to be in it, I think we live in a society where you're pretty quickly going to be found out. Like, I think we live in a place where we're trying to find people that don't align with what they say they did, right? So if that's the truth, then, why are you operating like that? But people live in this fear of being found out to be a fraud. And I'm like, well, either it would have happened already, or at least give yourself credit for being really good at continuing to fool everyone. Like, at some point, own it.
I know you said your podcast came to you, that you were on someone else's show. They wanted to produce it. What inspired the types of topics and guests, and how are you finding those people? Tell me a little bit more about the podcast side.
So for the podcast, it was Juleka Lantigua. She's the executive director of LWC Studios, my podcast, the production company. And so I was on a podcast she was on called, it's like the flagship podcast for that production company, called How to Talk to Mommy and Poppy. And she liked my energy and the way I talked about things. And so she, gave me this kind of proposal and approached me with like, you should have your own podcast. And I was like, oh, that's cool, because I would like to have my own podcast. I just can't edit or do any of the stuff to make it happen, because, I want to do other things in life. And so like when we talk about guests, like some guests I find, but like I have really great producers who know a ton of people, and they go out and find all these people doing amazing things out in the world. Like we had David Bizarro. He's a puppeteer for like Sesame Street or something, and like he's on there, and it's like but I've never in my life met a puppeteer. But it's really focused on this kind of thing of where, and I think the spin for my podcast is to really talk about like, people of color, and how kind of being in spaces that, maybe weren't designed for them, or where they might be like the only person in that space, how they can kind of combat the feeling of like not belonging, so that, like it's not accidental. It's not that you don't belong. Don't take on ownership over all of those feelings that you might have. Maybe the environment isn't one that's, kind of conducive to you. And so it's like, kind of being okay with that piece of it. So that's kind of like how it works for me. And so it's set up in a way of where my producers kind of do a recording with the guests, and then I come on and I get to kind of critique it and do my thing after hearing like the snippet that they like edited and recorded.
Yeah. Well, it's a great podcast. Definitely
Thank
encourage
you.
people to take a listen, and tons of diverse guests. So you've got everything. I didn't listen to the puppeteer one, so I'm going to have to go back to that because it's something that I know nothing about, but really interesting guests and super relatable too when it comes to like trying new things and not having that self-doubt. So definitely encourage everyone to give it a listen. From a learning standpoint, like where do you feel like you've had those kind of key moments that define and have shaped who you are? Big lessons, big wins, or even things that were mistakes that you learned from? Are there like defining moments that you can really pinpoint?
So for me, a couple of defining moments. One was elementary school. Like I said, I got bussed out to a school that, you know, I was very different from like my neighborhood and people I had kind of grown up around, and having the experience of where, you know, like if say, you know, Jeremy turns off the lights, they say, Jeremy, don't turn off the lights. If Stevon turns off the lights, there's a call home to mom, right? And so it's like, okay, the rules are going to be different. And so what I did was kind of took that to say, then just be yourself, Stevon. If people are okay with it, they're okay with it. If they're not, they're not. And like I talked about earlier, is like the intelligence is that I've always been good in school. Like school's been really easy for me. So like getting good grades or A's is not like a difficult thing. My memory it's really an amazing thing. Like if I ever get dementia, I'm screwed. But for like the time being, not having it, I am good to go. Like I don't have to really study a whole lot. Like if, you know, information is shared to me, it kind of just sticks and I just keep it. So like, you know, clients will ask me like, oh, you aren't taking notes. Like, yeah, no, I'll be here tomorrow. It's all good. It'll be here next week. I'll remember it and from the other 15 people or whatever. And so like, I just kind of got A's in school, but like, I never really kind of policed my behavior. So like I talk in class, I'm class clown. I'm, you know, making friends with everybody. Probably annoying for teachers. Like I feel bad now that my sister's a teacher and like I was probably like one of the problem students. But you know, I got good grades. And so I felt like if I got an A in geometry, you can't take that away from me. All the other stuff, I don't care. And then kind of like always being interested in people's lives. And so I felt like for me, I had this experience of where I was never really like the best athlete. I could play and I could do things well, but I was always like the captain of a team. And so what that kind of told me was like, hey, Stevon, you've got this gift that obviously adults in your life see, of where you can talk to people. So if something were happening on the court and, you know, one of my teammates is something happening, Stevon, go talk to him, or, you know, go handle that. And I was like, people trust me with like being able to attend to stuff. And so, yeah, like, I mean, I think that's kind of been my thing. And then like with clients, I learned all sorts of stuff. And I think, you know, I worked with couples for a while. I don't do that anymore. I've learned some things about couples and communication. And so hopefully it's helped me in my relationship. But yeah, you know, I think clients teach me that how you present or how people see you isn't always kind of the truth that you have about yourself. And so I always kind of operate or approach the work I do with the idea that at some point we got to evaluate who's right and who's wrong. And if enough people are seeing a lot of good in you and you aren't kind of connecting with that, or they're seeing a lot of ability and you aren't able to connect with that, then we've got to start to question why that is. Unless you're saying, you know, all those people are liars. I don't think so. Enough people say something about you, you know, maybe it's not true, but we got to, you know, check to see what's going on with that. And I don't think people do that enough.
Yeah. Being as a therapist, a lot of people come to you to talk and you're a great listener. Who do you go to when you need someone to listen to or you need advice, since you're often the one giving it?
Yeah, for sure. So I, you know, have my own therapist that I work with. I'm kind of like, so this is probably like unpopular belief, but I'm like a popper inner and popper outer of therapy. It's like, you know, because this is the way I do therapy. So I treat therapy the same way like I do it. I try to tell people I'm trying to put myself out of a job. So if I have something going on, I'll pop in and I'll, you know, kind of unpack it, get some tools, pop out, and I need to go do stuff. So like I treat it kind of like training. Like, you know, you should be doing something outside of the time that we're together for an hour. And if you aren't putting those skills to work, and you aren't really practicing with them, then you're becoming dependent on me. And so I treat therapy the same way for myself. But also part of being a therapist, one of the benefits is that you have a lot of friends who are therapists. And so they're really, really good listeners. And so like, we'll have lunch or coffee and we'll talk about stuff. And you'd be surprised like how attentive people can be to your needs who are really well trained in doing that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a let's get coffee. Really, I just want you to give me a session right now. Yeah.
I know it works.
Therapist friends.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, oh, I go to their office and like you said, we have a coffee and like they share stuff and I like, take care of them. And then they're like, so what's going on with you? And I'm like, oh, well, they stole my catalytic converter off my Prius and like, I've got to get a new car. And they're like, oh, that sucks. Like, how's that? Are you going to are you happy about that? And like, I can process all my stuff.
And then 20 minutes later, you're down a totally crazy rabbit hole with them, I'm sure.
100%, 100%, yeah.
Active listening is a really hard thing for people to fully master. And with so much like noise and in our work environment, we have clients and then there's internal meetings and then there's Slack always popping up. And so it can be hard to be 100% tuned in. And for you in your career, you have to be, because you have to remember everything, even if you have a crazy good memory.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you think about active listening and being really attentive, what advice would you have for this group on how to be better at that?
Oh, I love this question. So I'm really like big into communication and language. When I was Before I went to university, like I went to Cal State Fullerton for undergrad and Long Beach State for grad school. But before that, I went to Santa Monica College. It's, community college. And I went there for a year or two. In that, like in all of my, 18-year-oldness, I was in an English class and I got introduced to Deborah Tannen. She's a linguist out of Georgetown University. Amazing. She talks about like communication between like, in like intimate relationships and romantic relationships, or just between like, men and women. And so like the way she approaches things, she talks about, how we communicate, how we listen to understand, and, like the different barriers to being able to do that well. So when you're talking about listening, like I think most times people are more listening to respond than listening to understand. And I think if we can kind of get to that place of where we're listening to try to be understanding of things. And so I took that to kind of apply it across all walks of life. I mean, I look at like in politics, how things happen. It's like, you guys aren't even like listening to each other, but what we're saying is like, you aren't understanding each other and you aren't trying to understand. You're just trying to kind of get your point across. And so like, I think and I do some work with like, C-suite teams and stuff like that and like executive leadership. Part of it is like, there's a disconnect between what you said and what people heard. And so I think like as the messenger, we're often clear in our head about what the intent of our words were. And we get frustrated when, it's not received in the way we intended. And we blame the other person for that. I think that that's like a faux pas. Like, I think we've got to say that, communication is between two people. Did I communicate? And again, I'm big on like word choice, the adjectives we use, our tonality, all that stuff matters. And how did you check in with the person to make sure they understood the message in the way that you meant it to be understood, like the way you intended it? We don't often do that. It's like, I sent it out. We got it. Yeah, we got it. That's not enough for me. And people probably get frustrated. And this is in my personal life too. I will ask, like, just so I'm clear. And then I'll be like, so Sam, you said X, Y, and Z. Did I get that right? Because this is an opportunity for you to kind of like say, nah, Stephen, that's all the way off. Or you got this part right and correct me. But, we move forward kind of based on this. Well, I thought we had an understanding, and that's part of the problem. We didn't check to see. So I think for like, if any group I ever talk to, if you can check in to make sure that your message was received in the way you intended it before you leave, it can be cumbersome. It can feel awkward. It's like, well, I got to do that every time. I don't really want to talk to people. Or you can kind of go around like, continuing to have faux pas in your communication, and good luck with that too.
Well, I think we use the phrase trust but verify. And I feel like that's kind of what you're explaining. Trust that someone understood, but verify that they understood exactly how you were trying to communicate. So definitely resonates.
And be inquisitive, because I think like how you're saying, like, oh, you know, we're on Slack and stuff like that. A lot of communication that's nonverbal gets lost in, you know, text and stuff like that. So yeah, if you can make sure that you ask the questions before you kind of go to the place of the feeling, because I know that like what we experience first is the feeling that it has when we read someone's words or we hear some words and we're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not, nah. And I want to, you know, kind of respond. It's, hey, you said this thing. Did you mean this? You know, like you said, the trust but verify. And I think it's wanting to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to be evil or malicious or whatever, or, you know, kind of harmful to you in their intent, to like give them an opportunity to kind of clear it up so that you don't take yourself to a place that maybe you don't need to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that happens all the time. I think we can all agree that you read something on Slack, on email from a client, from a colleague, and it's so easy to just assume that it's how someone intended for it to sound, and it's complete opposite. So yeah, that's great advice. And
yeah, it's the per our last conversation is an attack. Like
the client clapbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Like, per our last, okay, I got. But now we're in this conversation. What are you talking about now? Like,
well, I love to talk imposter syndrome and kind of more about the beliefs around imposter syndrome and your belief of what it is and why people have it, and that it's a spectrum. So tell us a little bit more about like your philosophy around imposter syndrome.
Sure. I'm glad you said a spectrum, because I see it as like, you know, and you'll see if you guys take the quiz, it's not like, do you have it, do you not? It's more of like, you know, how much imposterism do you have? So my philosophy, and it was founded, you know, by Dr. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. They were like doctors at, you know, psychologists at University of Georgia. And this is like back in like the 70s, like late 70s, when they kind of coined the term. But my kind of approach is this, is that I say imposter syndrome is a situation where people who are going out doing really amazing things have a difficult time connecting with the parts of themselves that are responsible for their success. And so like the way I think about it is like people are out achieving and accomplishing, and for whatever reason, they feel like they're going to be found out to be a fraud, that they don't really have what it takes to have reached the level of success that they have. And so my job is to kind of get people to question that, to not really accept that as factor, as reality.
And how does self-doubt play into that? Because that's really what it's all about.
So it's like imposter syndrome, like self-doubt on steroids. So I try to get people to kind of understand it in this way, that self-doubt is appropriate, right? So like when we think about emotional experiences, we have healthy negative emotional experiences and unhealthy negative emotional experiences. So as an example, you might have anger. Healthy. Anger is okay, right? Healthy negative emotion. Rage, not so much. That's the unhealthy version of that. You know, sadness, appropriate, healthy. Depression, maybe we don't want to get there. And so with imposter syndrome, self-doubt, appropriate, right? Like it's our first speaker box, right? Like, you know, it's the first time we've been on this. I don't know if I'm going to get it right. You know, is the technology going to go well? You know, I'm going to show up. Is the link correct? All these things, like, you know, oh man, I gotta get on 10 minutes earlier, because what if the sound is off, my mic doesn't work? I'm gonna have to troubleshoot. And so that's like appropriate, right? Because I haven't done this before. But if we did this every Thursday for the last 5 years, I shouldn't have that same level of fear and concern. And that's when I say that's what imposter syndrome. It doesn't subside or go away once you've kind of exhibited some mastery or got, you know, what we would think would be like an appropriate level of confidence, because you've done it enough. It doesn't go away, it doesn't decrease. And that's a problem.
Do you think that when, for that specific example, like you reach that milestone, and then does it just moves to the next thing, that you have that self-doubt?
And this is why it impacts high achievers or really successful people kind of super frequently, right? Constantly doing something new because you're leveling up all the time. It makes it hard because a lot of the stuff you're doing is new. You haven't done it before in your career because you keep evolving, you keep rising to new levels. Again, appropriate, but also there's a takeaway there. If you keep getting to levels and you keep being successful, then why are we ignoring that as you'll figure it out and you'll be okay? And I think that's where the disconnect comes, is that they attach to the feeling or the experience of the newness and don't kind of take a bird's eye view of the fact that, like, I've had to do a lot of new stuff over time and it's worked out pretty positive for most of it. I think I'll be okay here. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how it's going to work out initially, but at some point I'll be fine. And that's what I'm trying to get people to kind of attach to, and they don't see it initially for themselves, and they keep doing new stuff so frequently that they never really get to a place where they are mastering things.
The transferable skills that came up on the podcast with that producer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think that, like, I use a lot of analogies in my work. So here's the thing. Our brains are really good and terrible, like, at the same time. Like, really good if we give it proper information, like, to do something with and set direction for it. But, like, unchecked, horrible pieces of machinery. So like, the way I think of it is that, like, you're doing something, you get to a level, and then you move on to the next one. Our brain says, well, this thing is new. I've not done this specific thing before. I'm starting all over. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And now we're in a panic. And I'm trying to get people to recognize that, yeah, you haven't done this before, but a lot of the stuff you have done that's made you successful in this other place is going to be okay. So as an analogy, you need to drive to Disneyland. You've never been to Disneyland before, and you're like, oh my God, I don't know where it is. I don't know how to get there. I've never driven, like, that far south on the 5 freeway. Okay, cool. Have you driven a car before? Yeah, I have. Have you been on a freeway before? Oh yeah, you did. Oh, you made right and left turns. Like, okay, I think for most of this stuff, you'll be fine. Like, it's just the final destination. You aren't sure how you're going to get there, but you had directions to different places before. You've got most of what you need to be okay. The rest, you're going to figure it out. And I'm saying, trust yourself that you'll be able to figure out the stuff you don't have yet.
I love that. Yeah, I think for everyone on the Power Digital side, I think we've got a really high performing, hungry growth mindset team. And so we're constantly doing new things. And so I think this sense of self-doubt can come up a lot with with this group and other high performing professionals, because you're challenging yourself always. And so there's a level of, I don't know how to do it. And we have this, we do an award for it, but we have this Figure It the F Out award that we do every quarter.
I love it.
It's really because you don't always know the answer, but if you challenge yourself and try to figure it out, you can most of the time get there. So I think that happens a lot in, young professional lives. And I'm curious if there's, for the patients that you work with or conversations you have on your podcast, do you tend to see this at specific stages in someone's career professionally more than others, or certain age groups? Like, where do you see this happen the most?
So when I spoke a little bit earlier, like, alluded to kind of the commonalities that I see in, like, the histories of people that struggle with imposter syndrome. And so this is a roundabout way to answer that question. So part of what you see is people who come from families where parents were, like, super critical of them. And then not that the parents were mean or horrible or terrible people. It's more coming from a good place of, like, wanting you to be the best version of yourself you can be. But it felt like nitpicking almost, that, like, you got told or corrected a lot often about what you were doing. So sit up straight, don't chew your food like that. When you speak this way, or, direct eye contact. And it's like the message you get is like, well, I'm constantly doing things wrong. And you start to kind of take that with you as you move forward in life. And so you're adopting this narrative about yourself that you have a tendency to not do things well. And so, like, there are other things that happen kind of like in our, we're the first ones to kind of achieve a level that the rest of our family hasn't. And, we kind of feel like, well, do I really know what I'm doing? Because no one in my family's done this stuff. And I think you're speaking to a part of it of where you've alluded to it a couple of times, where there's a young company. You guys are, not young company, but like a young team. And you guys are doing all this amazing stuff. It's also when we have some expectations about, like, how stuff's supposed to happen and how fast we grow. And so if you guys are growing fast and you guys are elevating and climbing the ladder, kind of accomplish and achieve stuff very quickly, then you never really get settled into the idea that you've got it. And so I think that like how fast you grow is a result of like how closely you can connect to the parts of yourself that are responsible for your success. I think the problem is that, you know, and we'll kind of dive into like your definition of success, is that you put a time limit on how that's supposed to look. And for some people that's the case, but you got to run your own race. So, you know, if it takes you too much to be able to get to a level of understanding to do a thing really well, and it took somebody else 2 years, that has no impact on whether you're doing it right or wrong. That's just the difference in how long it took that individual and it took you. So lean into the fact that whatever it is about you, it only took you 2 months for you to be successful at this, and keep pushing.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I think I'd be curious on, let's say you have someone come to you, they've identified that they have these challenges with imposterism. Like what kind of advice do you give to people? I think both personally and professionally. Like, are there things in people's personal lives that they can do to not have them feel this way and reflect that in their professional lives?
Oh, froze for a bit. There you go, you're back. Yeah,
Did I
you were
freeze?
saying, I think I got most of it. Here's trust and verify. You were saying, you were saying that are there things that people can do kind of on a daily basis to, I guess, kind of check or combat their imposterism, you know, as they kind of go out and live life and do things?
Exactly. Yep. Verify.
Well, I got it right. See, that's how I model for everyone how you can have a conversation and we can move forward together. Good job, Samantha. We're lockstep and we are moving together through life really well today. So yes, there are things. I think the biggest thing, and this is kind of what I see with, you know, don't bash me, but you know, kind of the generation we're in, is that there isn't enough time spent kind of acknowledging the good or the accomplishments or the successes you have, and we're kind of on to the next one. And so like that's a problem for me, because if you don't spend time kind of reflecting on what you've accomplished and what you've done, how can you really feel good or feel accomplished at all? I try to tell people, again, the brain is really good if you give it stuff to, you know, to work with, and if you don't, it will go haywire. So if you've not told yourself you've done a good job, if you worked really hard to accomplish something and you spent, you know, literally 0 minutes thinking about, oh, look at what I just did, and reflecting on, you know, the fruits of your labor, how can you feel good or feel accomplished then? Especially if you're spending an exorbitant amount of time thinking about what you need to do and where things are going and what hasn't happened yet. Then what you're telling your brain is that the stuff I've done doesn't really matter, and I need to be worried about the stuff that hasn't done, that I haven't accomplished yet. And your brain is getting a message that then you aren't accomplished because you still have so much left to do. And that's a problem. You've got to like really work and practice that. And so, you know, I wrote kind of, you know, my acknowledgement journal to help people practice some of that stuff, and got tools and skills in there. But like the one thing I give like in situations like this as a takeaway is we've all got smartphones. You all have a place where you can like keep notes, or you can like, you know, take screenshots and stuff, and like a folder for like your photos. Create a folder on there that says like, you know, acknowledgement journal or gratitude journal, and take screenshots of like compliments you get, awards you've gotten or received, emails that you received of people that said, hey, job well done, we got this, thanks for all the help, little things like that. So that when you're feeling like, well, I don't know if I got it, I don't know if I'm really doing a good job, you can go in there and quickly kind of look at that stuff and say, well, I know I feel this way, and my inner bully's telling me that, you know, maybe I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not really that good. But I've had all this information from like this data, you know, you got the tech company, you got data of all this stuff that says, hey, you're doing phenomenal, keep going. And it's like, all right, I don't feel it right now, but I know it must be true because I have so many instances that suggest that what I'm feeling isn't based in reality.
That's such a good, tangible idea that everyone should do.
Yeah, I legit have one on my phone. So
I love it. Okay. What outside of that, love the idea of the self-praise. And it's like this stop and smell the roses. If you accomplish something great, don't just move on without acknowledging the fact that you just, you know, did something amazing for in your professional life or your personal life,
Mhm.
and give yourself the pat on the back. And I think the self-recognition goes a long way, but I love the idea of that journal or log of things people have said to
Yeah,
you.
because we
Um,
dismiss that stuff. I mean, it's all coming from like this place of like, I want to be humble, right? Like, I don't want to brag about the things I'm doing. And again, I said, I can put emotion to the side and I can kind of be real logical about things. And so that, like, if it's a fact, it's a fact. I don't know that it's bragging. So again, analogies that I love to use. If I play basketball and I scored 40 points, I can tell people about that because it's just a fact. It's in the stat sheet. I didn't make it up. That's me just kind of sharing information. I think the problem is people feel like that if other people are not happy or other people are impacted by that or feel less than because they've negatively compared themselves to me because they didn't score 40, then I've done a bad thing. And I don't take ownership over people's, emotions in that way. That, again, I'm not intending to be harmful, but also I don't know that me talking about what I've done is in fact harmful to you. And so like when I think about humility, it's not really talking about my accomplishments less. It's more of not treating people less than because of what I've accomplished. And I think that's like a really distinct kind of, separation that people need to make when they're operating or going through life. So I'm all about singing your praises, celebrating your successes. You worked hard for stuff, get it. I cycle a lot. As you can see the bike over there. So I'm built like a linebacker, but I like to put on spandex and ride up hills. Don't question how I live my life. That's what I like to do. And when I do that, like it's fun for me, right? And so I'm working hard to get up these hills because I'm not the smallest person. What you're telling me is that once I get to the top, I need to end all celebration and not enjoy the downhill. And I'm like, yeah, screw that. Now I worked hard for the downhill. I'm gonna go fast and I'm gonna really enjoy that piece of it.
that's a great analogy. I love these analogies. What about if you're recognizing this in someone else that you're really, have a great relationship with and you feel like they could use some help getting out of this mindset? What can you do to help?
I love that. So for me, there's this like skill or tool that we use in therapy called othering. And so it's really effective and simple is ask people the same question, like the stuff that they're dealing with. So describe their problem and say, if it were me, what would you tell me? So like, as an example, like say, you're worried about being the kind of co-facilitator on this thing and you don't have it. And someone else was like, hey, so if that were me, what would you tell me? If people are really good about giving advice to others and not taking it for themselves. And so like, you'd be like, oh, you'll be fine. You've got this and you got that. You'll be so cool with it. It'll be good. Okay, well, tell yourself the same thing. Keep the same energy. Tell yourself the same thing. You'll be just fine. You have what it takes. You're talented. You're intelligent. You're smart. You're capable. Well spoken. All those things you said about me, true for you too. Why not?
What advice would you give to someone who just started off in their career? They're struggling with self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and maybe they don't have necessarily the experience that can be transferable professionally to something new that they're doing.
Oh, this is a good one because they're like they've like cultivated all the reasons why their imposterism is appropriate. So in situations like this, I'm like, okay, so you don't have a ton of experience. That's a true statement. You've gotten to a place and you're new in your career and it's at a level that you aren't familiar with. My thing is, what about all the people who kind of put you in this position? What do we think about them? Do we think that they wouldn't know somebody who's good at doing the work you do at all? Like they wouldn't know somebody. So say like I'm a new therapist. You're saying the person who hired me to work for their company to be a therapist doesn't know enough about it to be able to assess whether I'm good. So like at least if I don't feel it, then we can give them credit that they should know. And if they know, then why are we doubting ourselves? So like they see something in me that says, Stevon, you'll be a good therapist. I don't know it yet. I don't see it yet, but I got to trust that like at least they probably have enough wisdom to be able to recognize what it takes. So then I can lean on that. And so I think the way we kind of silence that inner bully that we have that's telling us, playing on our insecurities and, telling us that, hey, this is why you won't be successful. Say, well, like at least the people, it's their fault then if I don't do well. They should have known better. They should have seen how terrible I was immediately. And like, you know what, that's on them. That's not me. No, but for real, like, again, if they see something in you and they trust you, you got to start asking yourself the questions of like, why would they think that? And maybe you want to ask them directly. That's actually one of the activities I do in my journal. It's called collecting data, is to really ask people like, hey, what is it about me that you see that, you think are my strengths? And like, when you ask enough people, you'll start to see themes arise. And if enough people are saying it, and this is the theme, and they don't all know each other, and they didn't get together in some meeting to say, what are all the good things about Stevan? And like, this person over here said it, and that person over there said it, then I've got to start to say, you know what, I must be putting that out then, if that's what these different sets of people are getting about me.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. The journal that you're referring to, is that part of your book?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can grab one really quickly.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Might be a future purchase for myself, but I'm just curious what the framework of that book is.
I'm back. That was like the least professional plug somebody got with it. Yeah, it's this thing. It's my journal I wrote. It has like all these activities and stuff for people to do. Cool. Really ask yourself, like, what's the evidence say? So that, again, if you really don't have what it takes and you feel like a fraud every day, does the evidence support that you don't know what you're doing and that you're screwing up? And if it doesn't, then why are we kind of, excuse my French, making shit up? Why are we believing stuff that's not true?
Yeah.
The evidence should support that. I would think if you're terrible at something, if I can't play basketball, at some point when I shoot or I get on the court, we're going to notice that I'm not really as good as I said I was.
What is something that one of your patients taught you?
Oh, I like it. So I have this is an amazing kind of success story. She's at another kind of tech company. And when she got to me, really didn't think that she was, the best thing since sliced bread. I thought she was amazing all the time. She didn't think that of herself. And kind of what it taught me was like the connection between like childhood experiences and how that can really shape how we see ourselves in the future. And so like when I talk about, our past, shapes us, but doesn't define us, that I think we've got to be real strategic about making sure that we are constantly updating the narrative or our definitions of ourselves. We get updates for our phones pretty consistently and frequently. How often are you doing that for your own kind of assessment or evaluation of yourself? So that like things that, people held you to before, maybe you've outgrown those things. Maybe they aren't true anymore. Maybe the people in your life didn't understand or weren't able to kind of see you appropriately and correctly. Doesn't mean you need to adopt that same narrative about yourself. You should be doing kind of an audit or an evaluation of who you are and what you're putting out into the world so that you're making sure that you're aligned with who you are. And again, our phones are getting updated all the time. Go ahead and review and update your own kind of perception of self.
What do you wish your younger self knew that you know now?
These are like philosophical questions. What's the key to success? No, they are really great questions, Joy. My younger self, I think if I had any advice or like wish my younger self would know, would be like, I guess run faster. I say I'm a turtle in the sense that like I kind of don't do a whole bunch at the same time. Like you see me doing a lot now, but it's the way I add to that is like slow. So like, if we're running, I'm running, and then like, okay, now I'll add a piece of gum. So now I'm running and chewing gum. And then like, now I'm like holding my phone. So I'm running, chewing, and holding my phone. Just pick it all up and go. Like, I think that's what I need to do for myself. Like I got it and I'll be fine. And like what I know now is that that's true. Sometimes I didn't always kind of think that. Like I still press on and I do it even though I'm scared. Like I play scared. Like, hey, all right, we out here. I'm saying yes. I don't know how this is gonna go, but I'm in there. It's gonna go fine. Just do it. The reason I wanted to kind of address that one is because it's something that I talk about in language is like these kind of demand states. Is what we talk about it is that we put these, when we use words like should or shouldn't, then that's a demand on our behavior and what is supposed to happen and what's okay and what's not okay. And so like I'm real key or clear, kind of police making sure that we temper the way we say things. So it would be nice if, or it would be better if we might not want to, but to say we should and shouldn't, like really send the message to your brain that if this specific outcome doesn't happen, then something's wrong, it's all bad, it's terrible. So, you know, it's got to kind of, again, dampening or tempering kind of how we phrase are the things that are impacting our lives. If you Google Stevon Lewis, all my stuff comes up. I'm most active on social media on Instagram. I'm at Stevon Lewis MFT, the letters Mary Frances Thomas at the end. I have like LinkedIn and all the things, but like I'm gonna be more active on LinkedIn, and I think that the message on LinkedIn or kind of my narrative there will be a little bit different, as it'll speak more to kind of like leadership and, you know, executives and like C-suite speak, because I'm doing like a different part of my business is going to be targeted to that. But Instagram is where the fun is, and that's where I, you know, get into all my shenanigans.
All right, love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that probably rounds us out, and everyone can give Stevon a follow and buy his book and incorporate that into daily lives, daily practice. But huge thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to meet with us. I know it was super valuable. I took a bunch of notes, so thank you for all your time, and thanks everyone for joining.